If I sit up in a chair or a table where my legs naturally dangle, you see my natural angle is a little bit more straight than most people. Actually, I'm a little bit what they call pigeon-toed when I stand in a natural stance where I'm not compensating as walking, then my toes are a little bit inside my heels. This is not normal for most people, but that is how my feet align with the way my hips are. Since I have a birth defect, when I was born, my hips were pushed in a little bit more, my right side a little bit more than my left. So my toes naturally want to go pigeon-toed, and that is very important when we get involved in Kyusho, how I naturally stand versus somebody else. A lot of people are a little bit toes out, heel in, and then some more people are even more splayed foot, duck walk, all sorts of lovely little names that we give these things. So it's important to, with the particular nerve I'm going to talk about today, the weakness up here in the eyebrow, that you think about how somebody normally stands and how you naturally stand. So natural for Steve here is his toes are slightly outside. So he's a natural splayed foot, a little bit to the outside, where I was a little bit on the inside of my heels. That's most people are going to be like him. Some people will be splayed out even more. So what we're going to be doing is talking about people's kind of natural relaxed stance. So Steve is a little bit here, I'm a little bit here. This looks more like kind of a formal martial arts stance, heels out, but that's how my natural stance is. Other people will be a little bit farther out, but this is what we naturally see out of most people. There's a little bit of an outward angle, but not very much if you think about how the person's feet are aligned. So naturally, because of that alignment, his body takes pressure front to back, heel through the toes. So as I come up and he sees motion, he naturally braces for impact along that line. And we've talked about that several different times, several different videos, several different seminars, but that's his natural body prepares and positions its legs, its knee moves forward along that line. So anytime we are attacking, if we're going against that line, what happens is if he sees the attack coming, he braces along the line of the foot. We've talked about missing table leg and missing table leg. So if I want to attack, if I'm going straight into him, I am going to a spot back that you can't see behind the heel. If I take that same amount of pressure and curve it to the missing table leg, he loses his balance. So with that in mind, the point that I want to discuss is this one up along your eyebrow line. And Taika never talked about a specific name for a point. He always just talked about weakness. And he said you can just go along your eyebrow until you find that little spot that's weak. It doesn't necessarily have to be painful, but you can kind of feel a soft spot. So if I'm pushing out here or out here, I'm not getting it. But as I go in, he can feel where that little spot is, and right about there is where it's at. I see a lot of people at seminars trying to strike this point, and some people succeed and some people don't. What I want to discuss is go ahead and move your feet in just a little bit. That's a more pigeon-toed stance. If I'm coming up and hitting straight that way on a pigeon-toed person, if I'm hitting kind of straight more from the front, I'm going along that line. Rotate out just a little bit more like you were before. If I'm going straight this way, which is what most people do when they're in a seminar situation and they're trying to learn to strike this point, they're coming up here and they're striking right there. Well, I'm striking straight along the line of his foot. Take your feet out a little bit more, so to where you're more splayed foot. A very splayed person can take the angle from that direction. Right? So Taika talked about angles are very important. First angle is the angle of his foot in regard to what I'm hitting. Another angle is the angle of the object I'm hitting. This is kind of round here. So I can only really get a strike to that point that gets good kinetic impact and penetration from this angle. So that angle, whatever the angle is hitting here, should not match that angle. So go back to your natural stance. If I'm coming in and hitting this angle, and I'm coming straight from side here, it's uncomfortable to him, and I'm not hitting this hard, but it's uncomfortable, right? It's got a little sensitivity to it. If I am matching that angle like I am, I don't get much of a reaction. If I impact and go this way, well, his angle of his head, the curvature of his head, doesn't allow me to get really much in the way of penetration. If I go follow this until the point of impact and then curve, I get a much greater reaction out of the person. So instead of going straight into it, I get a little bit of a curve and I'm still not hitting him very hard. Now another principle of Kyusho, prevent escape. So if I want kinetic load to go into this, I should probably be doing something that a lot of times we don't do when we're learning things and we're doing demos, so we don't get a very good response. But if he had punched and I came up and I captured, and then instead of following his foot, I curve that way, I curve towards the weak point, I'm going to get a much bigger response from the person. So looking at the angles of your opponent's feet is very, very important. If he's more pigeon-toed, go heels out just a little bit, and I do that same motion, right? Now his line of defense is this way, and I hit him very light still, but you saw a more dramatic response because I'm shearing off where he's load-bearing on his feet. The next thing you can do to help alleviate that, what he's doing is he's placing forward motion. When he sees this, it's his natural instinct to kind of go against it, right? He wants to brace for impact. So brace for impact is another principle. So the way I mitigate that is as I do my initial windmill motion to get to here, is I go towards his eye, and that time he took a step, and I didn't hit him hard at all. I'm just barely touching him. But I defeated this angle. I capitalized on the roundness of his head to get the proper angle here, but I defeated his brace for impact by temporarily blinding him by putting this hand towards his eye. Your natural reaction is to blink. When his eye opens, I've then hit this at the proper head angle and the proper foot angle.